have actually really liked 4th edition D&D. While it has been criticized for turning Dungeons& and Dragons combat into more of a miniatures game, this has actually allowed me to enjoy D&D in ways that I haven't so much previously. People say that having all these rules prevents creative solutions and shifts focus from the actual roleplay. But if you were to follow this logic, then why even have rules at all? Why not just allow players to imagine whatever classes and powers they like, and let the dungeon master come up with the world mechanics on the fly? Well, that wouldn't work now, would it? True creativity cannot exist without rules and boundaries, as the ultimate mark of it is being able to work around these to find new solutions. This is what makes role-playing so interesting. Rules and settings define the general framework of the world around you, but having a human dungeon master means that unlike with computer games, you can try new and unscripted ways of interacting with the world. Without clear rules, it is less you interacting with the fantasy world and more just practicing story writing by committee, with the dungeon master being the editor. But what I really wanted to talk about here is the adventure that for a lot of people was the introduction into the world of Dungeons and Dragons 4th edition. The Wizards of the Coast module, Keep on the Shadowfell. Before we take a closer look at it though, let's mention one thing that really threw me off when playing these Dungeons and Dragons 4th edition modules. It was a new setting. It's not really Forgotten Realms anymore. The 4th edition spun off this new world Eberron, and I wasn't a fan really. Forgotten Realms to me are synonymous with Dungeons and Dragons, and although other settings obviously existed and were popular, it's the Forgotten Realms that are now forever associated with the word fantasy, and even if some people don't quite realize it. Whenever you think of a generic fantasy setting, you most likely think of the Forgotten Realms. The setting has had such a huge impact on all kinds of media, like books by Salvatore and other writers, pretty much every fantasy movie, countless games, etc. So when somebody puts a new race into Dungeons and Dragons like the Dragonborn, this feels like a huge change. But back to the adventure itself. You start with a brief introduction into the region and the choice of 3 possible hooks, all of which assume that the characters are already a party working together. And considering this is an early level adventure meant for introducing players to the game, I would say it's an actual good thing. Having individual hooks and forming a party in the tavern somewhere as part of the adventure itself may sound more fun, but it is harder to pull off for new players and may turn into an hour of role-playing throwing insults at each other and then culminating in a brawl, which again can be fun, but also can totally break the party before any adventuring has even taken place. You get to pick between either searching for a lost mentor, being sent by a scholar to examine the ruins, and being sent by a priest to stop the big bad guy of the module. I would say that the second one is the best one, since it doesn't drop a common mentor in the party which might not fit with their backstories. It doesn't reveal the name of the big bad guy and the purpose of the quest, allowing you to gradually escalate the conflict. The first thing that happens is the party being ambushed by the goblins. The first thing that happens is the party is being ambushed by goblins. Cliché? Yes. In fact, this is great because it allows your players, which probably are playing the first D&D 4 game, to immediately try the biggest changes in the system, the combat. You absolutely should not omit this in favor of roleplay. Let the players have fun and explore their new powers. You are also immediately introduced to the other big change in the 4th edition, the minions. Minions are essentially cannon fodder, with 1 HP, allowing for this cinematic feel of fighting hordes of enemies and relieving the dungeon master from keeping track of their health points. At higher levels, these get pretty interesting as they still have powers on par with regular monsters, and minion spellcasters become these glass cannons that, when fired smartly, can actually really hinder the party despite their frailty. I also love the flavored text bits in the module and the tactics blocks that, in addition to the obvious monster stats, give you tips on how these enemies would behave to make sure the newcomer DMs can properly emulate their behavior. One thing I don't like here though is the lack of maps without the enemy placement icons on them. It's not a huge deal, but having clean maps would make for a more immersive experience. Now this maybe is because I just photoshopped the maps out of the PDF version of the module that I had and then imported it into MapTool. After the encounter, you make it into Winterhaven, which is rather generic but filled with NPCs, which gives the DM a way to really hook the players, and it can easily be used to tie in some more adventures in. You don't get maps for the insides of the buildings though, since nothing happens there, but I strongly suggest adding some to the mix. I would actually add another simple encounter to the tavern just to make the players feel the town more instead of it being just a rest and buy hub. You also meet Ninran there, who is later going to turn out to be a spy for Carlisle in the city, so make sure you make her memorable to the players in some way. Then you go and clear out a cobbled lair. It's a varied encounter set up in two waves, and as a result, you learn the name of the big bad guy from the letter you find. You can easily kill your party here, and you shouldn't really be holding back, but what you should do is come up with a contingency in case this happens. For example, make the kobolds be ordered that they have to capture the players in life instead of killing them on the spot, and then trying to wiggle out and continue the adventure from there if this happens. Next up, it's the burial site, which would be the place where you find your mentor if you took the first story hook. And you get to fight Calrell himself. Well, not really, it's his spectral apparition, which again is a great approach here, since the party can sort of meet the villain and actually feel like they achieved a milestone defeating some form of him. This is so much better than numerous other modules that just give you the name of the last guy you need to defeat, and you only interact him when you meet him in the throne room like 5 pages before the end of the adventure. And indeed, this is a milestone. The party returns from here to Winterhaven, talks to NPCs, rests, and levels up. This is also the place where the module suggests you level up the NPCs a bit by giving them mannerisms, like making them appear bored, greedy, shy, etc. This is good advice in general, but if it's overdone, it could make the NPCs look even more cliche and cut out. I would actually recommend just assigning each NPC a personality of some person you know from real life. This avoids making them one-sided, and it's much easier to roleplay. Here you also learn of the keep that is your next venture. The story is that the Shadow Rift opened under the keep, making its lord Sir Keegan go mad and kill, or at least attempt to kill, everyone within the walls, until he was dispatched by his own guard. This keep became abandoned, and as I said, his ghost roams under the keep still. The actual truth, though, is that he survived, came back to his senses, and committed suicide and then roams as a ghost. Honestly, this is unnecessarily grimdark and can easily kill the mood if your players are having fun with the adventure. Also, admittedly, it fits with the next part of the quest being the underground dungeon with zombies, but you really should consider changing the story a bit to make him being killed by something that just came out of the Shadow Gate. When you actually meet Keegan later on, the interaction is not that meaningful, and so it doesn't justify having this grim backstory. Now, the keep itself has a grave layout. There are tombs, caves, slime, new monsters, interesting encounters. No room is really wasted, but again, my only problem is with the map. Why mark out the secret passages and the traps? I had to apply some creative masking in map tool to hide the big S letters marking secrets, and had to come up with new places for traps and just consider trap signs being decorations on the map, since it was too cumbersome to hide it from players. For your future maps, let me give you a suggestion. If you want to mark traps or something secret, just use the coordinate grid and like a general location. Like write down that on G4 and H5 squares in room 11, there are 2 fire traps. This way you can show the map to players while having a reference for yourself. Coordinates can be a bit hard to mentally overlay, but if you group them by rooms and keep it to one at a time, you really shouldn't have too much of a problem. This is also where light sources and light ranges become important. MapTool deals with this quite well, but when playing an actual table, your best bet is to just win it and not be calculating which squares are light and which are dark, in my opinion. You also get a chance to freeze Plug, a goblin that can tag along with the party, providing comic relief and maybe a possible distraction in the future. If you really want, you can use him in combat too, which works best if you are also planning of letting him come with the party to Winterhaven after the adventure, as having him help in combat makes him feel more real than a generic NPC. My favorite encounter on this floor is the Excavation Site, since it has varied terrain with climbable ladders that can allow for some interesting combat situations. You can also push over the planks when the enemies are trying to cross them, thus throwing them down into the pit. So then you find Keegan and talking to him as a skill challenge, another new concept which is essentially defining a set of skill checks that the party has to pass to get a successful outcome. These are subjects to a lot of controversy since they really simplify NPC interactions to a bunch of roles. You really should avoid announcing that the skill check begins. Let the players themselves decide that they want to use a particular skill like diplomacy and have them actually roleplay what they are saying. And make what they say important by assigning bonuses to how well they make their case. So a character using his bluff skill gets a bonus to the roll if his lie is particularly convincing, and gets a negative bonus if it's something that an NPC would not really believe. Ultimately, Keegan just provides you with the truth behind what really happened and gives you a sword, and that's about it. Like I said, it's not much of a payoff for this grimdark intrigue. After exploring the first level of the keep, the party should be returning to Winter Haven, where they find out that Ninran was a traitor. Again, this is why it was important to really flesh her out in the beginning, since without it this reveal will not feel really impactful. A good approach is to make her warm up to one of the party members and say that she might have a request for them when they return, which will mark her as a quest giver sort of, and not as a betrayer. The second level of the keep is much more straightforward, while still having interesting additions such as the classic gelatinous cube and the giant moving statue trap. The final encounter is especially well designed. This is not a regular high HP monster here. Calrell has an amulet that he can use to teleport to prevent him from being surrounded, and there is a tentacle monster in the portal behind him providing shelter from the party. There are also other monsters with ranged and dazed attacks in the room. Overall, the encounter can be pretty difficult, especially if Calrell is played in a cowardly way. One of the best tricks here is to start with his ranged attack. Wait for the party to draw close, then teleport to the portal, but not let the shadow creature in the portal do anything hostile yet. Then wait for the party members to draw near, and then let the shadow creature attack them, protecting Carol and forcing them to retreat. This should throw them off guard and have a much better impact than if the creature is active from the very beginning. After Carol's defeat, there are numerous possible plot hooks to follow up on, looking for additional shadow gates, fighting Keegan's relatives to give them the sword that he gifted you, exploring Winter Haven some more, or maybe just straightforward jumping into the Shadow Portal itself. By giving bits of everything, this module should have given you a clear insight into what your players really want the most, and give you a great starting point to build in your custom campaign. So as far as the module itself goes, I would really recommend the Keep on Shadowfell, especially to new players, since it in just about 3 sessions can give a great taste of not only 4th edition but also role-playing in general. I hope you liked this short talk and hopefully see you next time.